have chosen one very triumphal sound piece from Jeremy Clark, and also some typical classical pieces like Andante Mozart, Forêt Sicilienne, and On Wing of the Songs from Mendelssohn. Enjoy.
Уважаеми колеги, драги гости, добре дошли на церемонията по връчването на доктор хонорис кауза на Българска академия на науките на професор Питър Таунсенд. Позволете ми накратко да ви представя професор Таунсенд. Той е роден в Локинган, Великобритания през 1937 година. Висшето си образование по физика получава през 1958 година в университета на Рединг, където през 1961 година защитава дисертацията си за доктор. И както той сам се изразява, вдъхновен от изследователското творчество я изпълнява за 2,5 години. Тематиката е свързана с изучаване на несъвършенствата в изолационните материали, основно сапфир, използвайки оптични техники. Тези методи стават основа на научната му дейност в по-голямата част от следващата му кариера. В същия университет защитава дисертация за доктор на науките през 1976 година. След докторантурата получава предложение за работа в Националната лаборатория Брукхейма на Лонг Айланд в Съединените американски щати, лаборатория с много висок статус и финансиране, която прекарва 5 години. Предимно в разработването на експерименти по термолумисценция и публикува първите изследвания с спектрална резолюция при много ниски температури. Останалата част от творческата кариера на професор Таунсенд преминава основно в университета в Съсекс, Като значителни периоди е канен и в други лаборатории, като например Нов Южен Уелс в Австралия и 1 година в Центъра за ядрени изследвания в Гренобъл. Особен интерес представлява предложението от професор Таунсенд универсален начин за създаване на оптични вълноводи в изолационни материали чрез имплантация с ионен сноп. Методът е изключително успешен и е бил използван за повече от 100 материала, за които не съществуват познати алтернативни процеси за изработка на такива структури за фотониката. В резултат на интензивното сътрудничество с испански колеги, физици и геолози от редица лаборатории в Мадрид, през 1998 година е удостоен с почетната степен доктор хонорис кауза на Автономния университет в Мадрид. За различни периоди професор Таунсенд работи в Упсала, Швеция, Китайския университет в Хонг-Конг и Националната лаборатория Бател в Съединените американски щати. В рамките на 6-годишното сътрудничество с Società Italiana Vetro, професор Таунсенд разработва редица приложни задачи, включващи ионна имплантация на продукти от стъкла, използвани в автомобилната индустрия. В допълнение към експериментите за имплантация с ионни снопове, той развива направление за изследване на дефекти в твърди структури, използвайки луминесценция и през 1990 година проектира и построява спектрометър за записване на термолуминесцентни спектри с почти 1000 пъти по-висока чувствителност, от която и да е промишлена апаратура. Това се оказва много продуктивно и позволява получаването на нови физични данни с важно значение в геологията. Продължавайки работата в областта на луминесценцията, професор Таунсенд създава метод за качествено подобряване на производителността на фотомножителите и скоростта за получаване на изображения. Тук има съществена връзка с колеги от Българска академия на науките, тъй като се постигна целта да бъде използвана подобрената чувствителност на фотодетекторите за ранно откриване на рак на гърдата. Методът е доказан и международно признат чрез номинация на финала за наградата на Европейската комисия за върхови научни постижения Декарт, която, както знаете, се разглежда като втората след Нобеловите награди. Нека да завърша представянето на професор Таунсенд и с два щриха извън научната му кариера. Той е отдаден музикант, свири на цигулка, пее, но освен това е много добър спортист, доколкото разбрах. Той е в 12-тицата на фехтовачите на рапира и сабе в света. Това е професор Таунсенд.
Ние, избраните от Общото събрание на Българската академия на науките, членове на управителния съвет на БАН, на основание член 2, алинея 2, точка 1 от Закона за БАН и във връзка с член 60 от Закона за висшето образование, по предложение на председателя на Българската академия на науките, присъдихме и присъждаме на професор Питър Таунсенд почетното звание доктор хонорис кауза на Българската академия на науките за големите му достижения в областта на експерименталната физика на твърдото тяло и за изключително плодотворното му сътрудничество с физиците от Българската академия на науките. Подписали главен научен секретар професор Евдокия Пашева и председател на Българската академия на науките академик Юлиан Ревалски.
Thank you very much for whatever you said about me. I hope it was nice. What I would like to do in the next few minutes is to say a little bit about my background. Many of you will know nothing about me at all except what you've just heard, and also present some of the ideas that have emerged over the time that I've been working. So if I go to this. Yeah, okay. So this is going to be a very brief review of the work I've been doing over the last 60 years. It's unfortunately a rather large number, but that's it. Nearly all the work has been involving imperfections in materials, and imperfections is a rather unfortunate choice of title because people have got very bad views about things which are imperfect, whereas in fact, in reality, they're absolutely critical. Looking back, I can see that my life has been in 3 stages. When I was a young student, I would say it was hopeful ignorance, and I just thought it was ignorance because I was young and hadn't learned much. Then, as time progressed, I had new ideas, and I'm going to give some examples of them as we go along. Now, looking back, in hindsight, I still only understand very partially what happened, but I suspect that that is reality. So, why are we looking at imperfections in general, and why is it actually quite a difficult subject? It doesn't have all the glamour of high particle energy or astrophysics or anything like that. But if I quote from something I wrote back in about 73, is with crystals, as with people, it's not perfection which we find interesting. It's the imperfections give them character, and in materials it gives them the essential properties which enable every technology which we use. And just to put myself in good company, I can give you a quote from Marilyn Monroe: "Imperfection is beauty." And I think she was right. Okay, so why do we need imperfections? Okay, I've got to rethink this. It's going to be positive features, not imperfections. So in flint knapping, which you will understand from there, if we hadn't had imperfections, we would never have been able to break a stone. It would have been 1,000 times too strong. So we wouldn't have got even into the Stone Age. With metallurgy, we've gone through metals like copper and then added imperfections to make them into bronze. To make different types of steel, you put in carbon and other sorts of impurities. And eventually you get to things like modern single crystal aeroplane engines, fantastic technology which has emerged. Okay, imperfections, without it, we would have no semiconductor technology. Optical fibres. I have to mention optical fibres because my daughter down there has worked in optical fibres for many years, and so if I didn't mention optical fibres, I would be in trouble. Basically, what you have to do is to start with materials and make them incredibly pure. And if you look in terms of transmission, they're roughly 1 million times more transparent than window glass. And then you put in other materials to control the refractive index, and because you've done that, you've got a problem, so you have to put in more materials to change the chemistry. Okay, imperfections again, absolutely essential in catalysis, and they're used in everything from making dyes, margarine, cleaner car exhaust, and in biology you're going to call them enzymes, but basically it's all the same game. As time has gone on, back in the 19th century, we were making controlled amounts of carbon into steel to make better steels, and we were thinking in terms of a few percent, because that was the accuracy that was possible. By the 20th century, we're looking to control the impurities, no longer called impurities, maybe call them dopants. And there we are putting them in very carefully in exactly the right place in parts per million, which is rather small numbers. By the 21st century, that's now, we've got control and understanding and measurements that we can measure in parts per million. And that's 1,000 million in the current usage. Actually, there was a minor imperfection because in England, the billion used to be 1 million million, And I even went to a science meeting quite recently where there was an argument going on between a European and an American. And the one side was saying, your number's far too big. And the other one said, no, it isn't. And they hadn't realised that there were two definitions of billion. I just hope that politicians, when they give you grants and money, get the right billion involved. So we've got better choice of words than imperfections, but you've got to find something a bit more positive. Also, if I talk about a part per million, 1 in 1,000 million, it's very difficult to visualise what's going on. So I'm going to not talk about the science there. I'm going to say, well, what happens if it's in politics or religion? So you can pick examples of people like Buddha, Confucius, Jesus, Mohammed, and so forth, leaders of countries like China, India, Russia. One person influencing billions of people throughout the years. So one person can have immense effect. But if you come down to a more mundane level, which we recognise on a daily basis, if you're looking at spices in cookery, okay, well, how big is a million? Okay, I've used an example here. I've said one eyelash is roughly 1/1000th of my weight. So it's something which you can understand, because you can see a person, you can see that 1 in a billion is not impossible. And if you go to things like a bee sting or sperm cell, that's even smaller quantities. Okay, so the reality in all these things, both in science and in social context, is that if you have an impurity, you have a dopant, not only does it sit in one place, but it influences the area around it. And that maybe means that the impurities cluster together and they distort the surroundings. So little things here are really quite critical. If you want a biological example, there was a book came out about 50 odd years ago by Rachel Carson called The Silent Spring. And she was saying the pesticides which were being used absolutely randomly everywhere at that time, and they were claimed to be perfectly safe because they only existed in parts per million in what you were spraying. They didn't realise that once they got into the body, they could concentrate maybe into the liver and other organs and get it into parts per thousand and be quite dangerous and lethal. Okay, my career. Believe it or not, that person up there was me. At the time I went to university. Maybe there was some resemblance. I went to Reading in 55, got BSc. Obviously Reading was a good place because I met my wife there, and another daughter went there subsequently. At that point we also had national service for military service, which was 2 years, which could have been very boring. But if you got a PhD in physics, you could always find a job where you didn't have to go into the army and do military service. So I thought, I'll do a PhD in physics because I enjoy physics. And I managed it in actually 2.5 years, so it was feasible to do that in England. So I came out at 23 and then got a job working for an army. I went to Brookhaven National Laboratory in America, which was a very prestigious and very well-funded, very well-funded laboratory, and spent 5 years there, and then returned to England in '66 and joined the University of Sussex. And basically was there until I officially retired. But in the interim, I had outings to a whole range of places in Australia, France, Sweden, Oklahoma, Madrid, and I had big collaborations with all these people. Collaborations are absolutely essential if you're going to do any science, and I've been very fortunate that I've had some excellent collaborations, not only with other labs, but with friends, colleagues, graduate students, and I've also been fortunate to have some very good technicians who could produced the equipment that we needed. So you'll recognise that the places I've had major collaborations with have been in Bulgaria, China, Madrid, several places in Madrid, electronic companies, glass companies, and a number of universities. I've also had some exceedingly excellent, intelligent, able postgraduate students and visitors and postdoctoral fellows, and somewhat unusually in England is that about a third of my co-workers have been female. I like female company, and we've always managed to collaborate well. Output from them, okay, about 16 master's degree students, some MPhil, which is an intermediate degree in England between master's and doctorate, and about 47 DPhil students. So, pictures. Obviously, you will recognise some of these people sitting here in Sofia, some of them are in the room. These are some of my colleagues from Sussex. Three of them, Dave Hall, Peter Chandler and Lin Chang, were my graduate students at different times, but we published a lot of things together, and including these three people, a book on ion implantation, which in optical materials, which has apparently been considered the Bible of the topic, which was very nice. So, local people. At one point, I actually had 10 postgraduate students. If anybody had said to me, how do you manage 10 postgraduate students, I would have said, totally impossible. But not only were half of them taller than me, half of them were certainly much brighter. And so with such intelligent students, they needed very little direction, and they helped with running the others as well. So that was and the other feature for this picture is that you can see even within that group, I had a varied background of nationalities working with me. So good students are key for success. So if you're going to have a research output, you obviously want success, and the world says you have to have publications, and you can't do that unless you've got money to fund everything and the people to enable it. I've been quite lucky that I've managed to raise funds and collaborated with the people, so that's worked out to be quite good. I looked back, and on a rough count, I have published papers with more than 400 people from 40 different countries. If I meet them, I say, hello, it's so nice to see you, but I can't remember their names. I've also had a very strong links, as I said, with the technical staff, and looking back, I've obviously been tolerably successful as a manager of collaborative projects, and being able to keep up the pace to do this. I also realised that my role was to come up with new ideas, design equipment and raise money. And then all the hard bits, the mathematics, the theory, software, I've got other people to do for me. And that seems a very good delegation of the effort. Looking back, I tried to estimate roughly how much money I'd brought into Sussex in the time I was there. And in today's money, it's about 24 million euros. So it was a reasonable sum. And out of that has come some books, 8 books. Not necessarily that total isn't finished yet, because I'm almost finished writing a book on music and technology. Some multi-author books, 550 publications, and some patents. I think I've got about 10,000 citations, but I think those are not a very good monitor, because with novel ideas, people don't cite you. Okay, so those are the books, mostly. Ion colour centres on imperfections, ion implantation, thermoluminescence, music, and a recent book, Dark Side of Technology, saying what is wrong with technology which we don't realise when we develop it, because we're so keen to see this new idea, we don't realise it's leading us into a problem later on. And so that I think is a very crucial book that's come out. My daughters say I'm competitive. Rubbish, rubbish, never believe that. And then I thought, well, maybe they're right. So, do I look competitive? The picture on the left, up here, that's archery championships. The guy in the middle with the beard, that was in fencing. I've done fencing for great lengths of time. I've even fenced for the UK veterans, and I've won the British Championships. If you wonder, this guy is standing on the same ground as the rest of us. He's 2 meters 18 centimeters high. A big man. Okay, so a little tiny bit of science. All of them are going to involve imperfections. All of them involving ideas and intuition that I've had during my career. All of them incredibly simple. When I was a graduate student, we were looking at defect formation in aluminium oxide, which is effectively sapphire, and we were using fast electrons, trying to knock atoms out of the lattice sites and then look at the properties afterwards. It was giving us results, but not as many damaged sites as we expected, and one possibility was that the local site stayed hot for much longer than was thought possible. And I remember taking my dog for a long walk one day, and actually came up with an idea. Instead of using sapphire, I could use ruby, because ruby contains chromium. The chromium ion gives you luminescence, and the luminescence persists with a measurable time scale, and so I could see the wavelength shift if it was hot, because it shifted. And sure enough, I did a calibration of the temperature of the emission lines with wavelengths, how the two changed together. And then when we looked at the difference between the optically stimulated or X-ray stimulated signals and the electron beam stimulated signals, the spectrum has shifted and broadened, and that actually corresponded to a big temperature shift which survived for long enough for the relaxation of the damage. I don't think any of you are old enough to realise that to do an experiment like that, which would be absolutely trivial today, was not so trivial when I did it, because the state-of-the-art technology was buying infrared film, which I then had to cut up in total darkness, load into the monochromator, and the spectrometer, and then develop it all in total darkness, develop it in the darkness, and then do density measurements to work out where the wavelengths were. So this was really a long and tedious experiment, whereas these days you could do it in minutes. 25 years later, after I did that, my daughter came to see me and said that she had invented an optical fibre which was measuring temperature, and she put chromium into the fibre and the wavelength shifted. So I think there's a genetic link somewhere there, which is in the science. Okay. When I went back to Sussex after being in America, I tried to think of an experiment which was completely new and nobody had tried before, and I came up with a somewhat unexpected idea that if you had an alkali halide, something like sodium chloride salt or potassium iodide, and you shone UV light on it, just light, in the absorption bands, which are called X-ray absorption bands, then the surface would decompose, the halogens, the iodine and so forth, would come flying out in specific directions, and then the excess metal would evaporate. It seemed highly unlikely, but it turned out to be perfectly true. I worked on it, published some papers. Nobody seemed interested, and so I quit. 15 years later, I got invited to a conference in America called the Distortion Induced by Electronic Transitions, and I gave a review about this work which they'd never heard of. I was obviously a bit ahead of my time. I thought it was then finished, but I went to a conference in the 90s and I found a man from Krakow who was still doing the identical experiment, so it hadn't gone totally out of fashion. One of the big things in modern photonics and science has been to make optical waveguides in materials where you can control the beam and switch signals from fibers between one channel to another. And all you need is to have a waveguide which has got a high refractive index surrounded by something with a low refractive index, and the light just bounces around inside this waveguide pattern. One of the key materials used was lithium niobate, but to raise the refractive index of lithium niobate to make this waveguide was very tricky. People used titanium doping, they used proton doping, hydrogen, and that slightly degrades the performance. Not easy. I saw an estimate from, I think it was Bell Labs, to say that in total there's been something like 5,000 research years put into this effort to make these waveguides. And it didn't even work for lithium tantalate, which is an identical structure, and you'd have to start all over again. At that point, I'd been doing implantation of materials with beams of ions to change properties, and I realized that, okay, it doesn't matter if the ions go in and damage the lithium niobate. I could actually exploit the fact that the damage from the ion implantation dropped the index by 10%. And once I did that, I could make a waveguide. Okay, so the physics of it, as I've said, all these things are extremely simple. That's very high energy, that's very low energy. You fire the, let's say, helium into the surface, it's going extremely fast, so fast that it produces some ionization as it tracks in, and only when it's slowed down at the end does it actually collide with the atoms of the lattice and knock them out of their place and destroy the lattice. So, what I've got in the result is that this is the refractive index increasing down here. The bulk material is high index. The damage is deep in, which is reducing the index, and that means I've got a zone in there which is still high index. So I've got a high index layer on the surface and a low index layer below it. I've made a waveguide. It didn't care what material was used, and not only did it work with lithium niobate, but it's worked, to my knowledge, with more than 120 other materials, and in most of them, it's the only known method of producing optical waveguides. And once you've got the optical waveguides, you can do all fancy things like with collaborations with people who do photonics, second harmonic generation, four-way mixing, all this high-power stuff. Because it was a novel idea, it was about 10 years before it became widely used. So, no citations. It was the routine technique by the time it actually was in use. So it's like saying with semiconductors, who made the first transistor? Nobody cites that in publications. So, that's life. I spent a great deal of my working life trying to write proposals, begging letters to get money for research. And just to show you that that's not the only way to get money. Back in 1988, I had a man come to my office and he said he worked for Società Italiana Vetro, which is the Italian glass company, and they were making car mirrors under some very expensive license process, and they were making car mirrors which were reflective in the blue. So at night time, you're not dazzled by the headlights of the cars behind you. And he was looking for another way to make blue reflective car mirrors. So he finished his little chat to me, and I said, oh, that's easy, I can do that. All you've got to do is to take silver, fire it into the surface with an iron beam, and the glass will then collect all these impurities you've just put in and make little nanoparticles of silver in the surface, and the plasma resonance of silver happens to be at 420 nanometers, which is in the blue, and if you don't like the blue, you can change the size of the nanoparticles, which will give you some more reflection across the part of the visible spectrum. He liked the idea. He gave me £1 million, which in today's money is about £3.5 million. So that was for basically 30 seconds thinking, an extremely good return for money. I've never managed to do it again. Okay, and just to show you it works, okay. This is blue, this is red, so that's the spectrum we can see. As you increase the iron dose, the reflectivity goes up in the blue, and with more dose, it moves across slightly towards the visible. So that's these pictures in here. And it worked perfectly well. And they used it. So that was a very simple idea, very profitable, and it funded a lot of other research. Not only did I make car mirrors, I also made sunglasses. Most sunglasses, there's a picture here of it shows up, a picture here of a scene. There's a picture here with some very expensive sunglasses. And here's a picture from my nanoparticle sunglasses, which look like mirrors when you look at them, but they have exactly the same spectral response as the eye, so they don't distort the colours. As part of a study of imperfections, one of the nice sensitive routes to look at imperfections in insulating materials is with luminescence. And in 1990, I wanted to not just record the luminescent spectrum, but I wanted to record the entire spectrum in one shot and do it while I was also changing the temperature of the sample. And that was not easy, because to get this multiplexed, many wavelengths system, you couldn't easily go out and buy a system. None could do what I wanted. And the only ones around then, the commercial ones, were not sensitive enough. The design was really quite straightforward, but it came out to be roughly 1,000 times more sensitive than the commercial ones. And that meant it's used by lots of visitors who came to work with me. And the apparatus, even though it was 1990, is still in operation in St Andrews, because when I retired I gave it to St Andrews University. And it's led to quite a few discoveries, not just in physics, but in archaeology, in geology, and other materials. Again, as part of the game of trying to do luminescence, use detectors called photomultiplier tubes. They're quite good in the blue. They were originally designed back in the 1930s for recording the soundtrack on film. So you went to the cinema, you had the picture here, and you had a black and white line along the side of the film, which changed in intensity, and that was recording the fluctuations, which gave you the speech and everything else. And that was detected with a very simple photomultiplier. But in the red part of the spectrum, they were not very good. So I thought of a way I can do better. I put project proposals into the Research Council. On one occasion, one reviewer said, I quote, "It's a 40-year-old problem. If it was soluble, it would have been solved. Reject." didn't get the money. And it is true that lots of places, in major companies in the USA, Holland, Germany, Japan and so forth, and England, had tried to make better tubes and had not managed. So it wasn't really such a silly comment for the man to have made. So I disguised it. I went with some colleagues from Bulgaria and decided if you could do better measurements of the luminescence and light in the red part of the spectrum, you could use it for detection of breast cancer and analysis of breast cancer. And we got the money, and we actually got a prize at the end from the Descartes prize. So just to show you how things were going, I plotted a graph here for blue and red from the companies from the 30s up to what was then the present time in 2004. And you could see their performance was steadily getting better in little steps. Our tubes went from there, which was state-of-the-art, to there. And don't forget, 100% is the limit, you couldn't get to that. The blue was okay, the red went from there to there. And if you extrapolate those lines, basically we'd hit the point which was 50 years downstream over there somewhere. So it was quite a nice advance. And just as a benefit, instead of them working and dying about here somewhere, we got improvements in signal here, and of course the numbers look fantastic because it was so bad to start with, so we had a lot of room for improvement. The other thing which I found was very funny was we were using imaging detectors, so pixelated photomultipliers, to take pictures, and they were produced by a company which was in fact in Sussex, and it was making tubes. They'd been making tubes since about 1990, and they were as fast as anybody's tubes. There were some in Holland which were comparable, and they thought that was their limit. And I said, why don't they do better? And they explained to me what their difficulty was. And as an outsider, I didn't have any prejudice about how to treat this. I said, oh, it's easy. I can see how to do that. And I gave them a suggestion. 2 weeks later, they came back to me and said, yes, our tubes are now 16 times faster. And because they were locked into the process they'd had for so many years, they hadn't ever thought about improving it. So, okay. We were lucky in our attempt to get a prize in the Descartes prize scheme, and you may not be able to read it, but you will find Avramov, Borisova sitting down, sighted down there. And so we're very happy with that. Okay, basically, my career has been exploiting friends and colleagues to do all the hard work, and I've just tried to get the money and some original ideas. And so, to them and to you, especially for this, thank you very much. If you wish.
Yeah, if there are some questions.
But please speak up.
I'm curious to ask you whether, although you said that you gave the mathematics to the other people, but you know what kind of mathematics
yeah, I know that much.
Has been used?
Yes, I knew what I wanted, but I'm not very good at mathematics, so it would have taken me far, far longer.
Yeah.
And to get somebody who really enjoys the mathematics is sharp and precise.
Because in this last achievement, which is related to detecting cancer, it seems there are some mathematical methods that treat the images, I suppose. So was there a mathematician in your team or no?
There was
in this
yes. From Sussex, yes.
Some questions? If not, let me on behalf of you also thank to Professor Taunsend for this interesting lecture, and we are really proud to have it among people that deserve Dr. Honoris Causa Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Thank you very much.